Hey everybody, I hope you're all doing as well as possible. I know these are crazy times and you're all probably dealing with a lot. I'm sure you're dealing with a lot of stress, a lot of uncertainty. So if there's anything I can support you with, please don't hesitate. Send me an email, send me a message on Edmodo, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. I'm around. I'm just trying to balance, checking the computer and keeping an eye on the kids, trying to teach them the stuff they need to learn. So this is my attempt to try to produce video content, and I hope it's okay. Let's look at the next unit. The next unit I wanted to cover is ethics, which is a unit that most students really enjoy. It brings up a lot of very deep and thought-inspiring questions. If you're unfamiliar with it, awesome, because then I hope that will really give you some things to think about. So, let's take a look at our intro to ethics as an area of knowledge to study in TOK. Let's start out with a question. Do you believe that we're all born with some basic sense of right and wrong? Have you ever thought to yourself, that person should just know what the right thing to do is? You should just know that that's wrong. Do I really have to tell you? I mean, should people just know a basic sense of ethics? Or is moral decision making something that has to be learned and maybe carefully taught? In TOK, we would wonder, what evidence would you provide for an answer to this question? And that's not so obvious. I would also wonder, when would your answer change? Could you think of a time that moral decision making is really obvious and a time when it's not? Or under certain kinds of conditions, people would just kind of dumb out and not even realize that they're doing the wrong thing? What kinds of context, conditions, situations, contingencies would actually make your answer look a little different? How does that make you think about the evidence question? So, right now, we're in a time of a unique kind of ethical dilemma. During the current coronavirus outbreak, if you've been paying attention at all, you've seen that doctors in Italy and now in the United States, especially New York City, are faced with this unthinkable kind of dilemma where they have to decide which patients get a ventilator and which do not, since there's not enough for all the patients that need them. Now, this means that they will potentially be evaluating who likely will live and who just has to be sacrificed. A ventilator, if you don't know, helps someone breathe when their lungs are injured. And this coronavirus can severely injure your lungs. And if you get to that point, you may need a ventilator, you may need to be intubated, have a tube put down your throat, and actually have a machine help do the breathing for you while your body tries to heal yourself against the virus. That's what a ventilator does. And in this situation, there just aren't enough ventilators to deal with all the people who are getting really severely sick. So this is a horrifying moral dilemma that doctors are faced with every day in this current crisis. Do you think you could make this decision? Do you think you could tell someone that their grandma can't have a ventilator because there's a younger person with better health and a brighter future and little kids that needs a ventilator? So therefore, grandma just has to bite the bullet? In some ways, I wonder how anyone could make this kind of decision. And of course, in TOK, we might wonder, is there a right way to make this kind of decision? Is there an ethical system that could actually give you a valid answer to this? One person must live, one person must be sacrificed. Well, this is what ethics hopefully is going to help us with. Ethics is meant to help with tough decisions. If you haven't heard of this as an academic subject or as an academic term, it is really a branch of philosophy. And what it attempts to study are questions of obligation and duty and the rightness and wrongness of our actions and our intentions. So you may interchangeably call it moral theory, or somehow morality is sometimes interchangeable with ethics. Anyway, it's about our decision making when it comes to right and wrong. Now, in terms of what defines it in the scope of TOK as an area of knowledge, it's actually kind of an interesting question because if you think about it, there is certainly an academic study of ethics. I mean, there are business ethics classes, there are ethics classes in philosophy, obviously, there are ethics classes in medical school, in bioethics, and all different kinds of contexts like that. There are ethics classes in financial management, in public management, in public health, in all of these different capacities in which we study, we also study ethics. Of course, some might say ethics is just a matter of kind of psychology, psychological conditioning, or brain chemistry. And so all this study is just a bunch of hoopla. Some also might say that you're moral because you're imbued with the grace of God, or because you have faith, and by faith alone are you granted the grace to be moral. That might be a kind of more traditional argument from monotheism. Of course, there's much disagreement about who gets to decide these questions and what actually constitutes the informed opinion about the area of knowledge called ethics. One of the things that makes ethics interesting, and both simultaneously really interesting and at the same time a little bit tricky, is that it is a shared and essentially social kind of phenomenon. I mean, in some sense, we only have ethics in order to be social. You want to be a good person so that you'll be a better mate and a better person in society. You want to be a better person so that other people will like you more. There's a lot of reasons why to be ethical, and it seems like those kind of social elements make us happier. And it's one of the arguments we're going to talk about why being ethical is a good thing, and why trying to act morally is a good thing. But at the same time, we disagree about all different kinds of little ethical minutia. From what are the ethics of I don't know, bathroom etiquette, and how to respect other people's property, to questions of global security. There are all different kinds of beliefs that people hold on these questions, and so it's also very much a personal kind of knowledge. So it makes it a little bit tricky to study. Hopefully, by studying ethics, we will develop a more personal, informed opinion. And then, especially in the day and age of social media, we have a unique opportunity to kind of challenge social norms and do it publicly. And in that sense, social media is very much empowering. In that way, we can contribute to new moral perspectives and shared knowledge. It's not always necessarily a good thing, though, so be careful with shared knowledge through social media. Briefly, I wanted to mention a couple of the excuse me. I wanted to mention a couple of the knowledge questions that were actually taken out of the textbook. One of them was, to what extent is evaluation of ideas in ethics, as well as all AOKs, dependent on, quote, informed opinion, unquote? Of course, this is a really interesting question. We might ask in ethics, how much do we rely on informed opinion in order to make our moral judgments? What's involved in being informed in the different areas of knowledge? And of course, in ethics, how informed do you have to be to understand and make right decisions? So, how do we actually know what the threshold is for moral knowledge? When do we know we're doing the right thing? This is a tough question to answer if you really think about it. Now, in this TOK lens, we're going to look at a couple of kinds of big picture questions, like, what are the knowledge foundations of ethics? What do we have to believe in order for certain ethical values to be true? Of course, how do we know right from wrong? The most basic moral question of all. One interesting question is, why be moral anyway? Something philosophers have dealt with in a lot of ways. To what extent does our knowledge of morality actually affect our moral actions? Well, this is a tricky question because a lot of times we might know the right thing to do and just not do it anyway. And of course, we might ask, what is the relationship between our ethical knowledge and all kinds of social experiences and structure? What are the broader connections to the big pictures in society? And we might look at that question about informed opinion earlier. What does it really mean to be ethically informed? The last thing I wanted to mention is that usually when we study ethics, we break it into these three spheres. And this is going to be the question that I want to ask you about in the end. The first sphere is meta-ethics. And this is the study of how we actually arrive at moral knowledge. What is it that makes us decide that something is right and something is wrong? Also, usually the biggest part of ethical study is called normative ethics, the second branch we'll talk about here. And that is the study of moral frameworks and decision making and specific decisions. So there are ways that people try to develop systems to apply to various situations in order to make ethical decisions and do the right thing. And that's called a normative ethical system. And the last area of ethics that you've probably already done at some point in your education is called applied ethics. And this is the study of some kind of specific moral problem and a study of the underlying moral concepts and arguments and evidence that we use to look at that moral problem. So, for example, if we were to take that bioethical problem of who gets a ventilator and who doesn't in a situation of medical scarcity, you might try to look at the theoretical underpinnings of different kind of arguments about why you might actually value one person over another. Broken down here, you can see moral theory can be divided in kind of these two ways, where on one way we look at the kind of underlying arguments, like, is there really a universal morality, or is it just relative to how we grew up and what we were taught? We might look at, is there really moral reasoning? Yes, there is. Or does it really just come down to instinct and gut feeling? And similarly, over here on the normative side, we can see the normative ethical theories that we're going to look at, and these are some of the famous ones we'll get into. And over here, the different branches of applied ethics. We're not going to get into these so much, but these are a lot of kind of classes you might take in college, like bioethics, ethics about sexuality, ethics about the environment. Okay, so I wonder, which aspect of ethics do you find most interesting? What part of this whole presentation do you want to study further? I left a post on Edmodo, and I'd like you to reply to it and tell me which part about this ethical study do you think would be most interesting to you and why? Just briefly. I hope to see you very soon, and I hope you're all doing really, really well and staying safe. Take care, everybody.